We're going to write equations of lines today. Now when we do equations of lines, we're going to use slope-intercept form. So we're always going to be coming back to y equals mx plus b. And when we write an equation of a line, when we get our final answer, our final equation, the m and the b will be numbers. We have to actually find their values. But in our final answer, the x and the y will remain x and y. This means that we must always find the values for m and b. And there's different ways that we'll find them. Sometimes they'll just be given to us, sometimes we'll have to calculate them. But we always have to find the numeric values of m and b. So here's going to be our first example. Write the equation of the lines with the given info. For number 1, I tell you that the slope is 10 and the y-intercept is -4. So up here at the top, I'm just going to put down my y equals mx plus b because that's what I'm trying to get to. And for this particular one, I actually just directly give you all your information. Your slope is 10. Well, that's my m portion, and the y-intercept is -4. That's my b portion. So my equation for my line on this one is y equals 10x plus a -4. Or you could write it y equals 10x minus 4. Those would still be the same type of thing. So for this one, I didn't have to do any calculation in order to find my slope or my intercept. They were given directly to me. I plug them in for m and b. Not always going to happen that way. So here's another one. A slope of 2/3, and it goes through the point 4, 6. Now I've got my m given to me, so I don't have to calculate my m at all. My m is 2/3. But this point, that's not a b. What I have to think about is what is it that a point represents? Well, a point is an x-y pair, and if I look at my formula, I have an x and a y in there. So if I were to plug these in, I would have 6 is equal to my 2/3, that's my slope, times my x, which is 4, plus my b. Now I have an equation that I can solve for b. So I would have 6 equals 8/3 plus b. Subtract the 8/3 from both sides, and now remember to subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So I'm going to change 6 over 1 into 18 over 3, minus that 8/3, and I'm going to end up with 10/3 is equal to b. Now that's not my final answer because my job was to write an equation of the line. I have just found my b though. Now I can go back and write my equation. So I'm going to have y equals, my m was 2/3, x stays x. Even though right here we temporarily changed x to 4, the only reason we did that was because we didn't have b. We had to solve it for b. So x goes back to an x. Same thing with the y. We temporarily had it as 6, but now it goes back to a y. And then I put my b in there. And I have my equation of my line. Okay, this third one here. All I've told you is 2 points that it goes through. So you want to think about, I didn't get my m, and I didn't get my b yet. I have to find both of those pieces of information. Well, when I have 2 points, I can use my slope formula to calculate my slope. So I'm going to do the difference of my y's over the difference in my x's. So I'm going to do 8 minus 4 over 2 minus a -3, and I get 4/5. So my slope is 4/5. Now I can back to like what number 2 was. I have a slope and I have some xy's to work with. What you have to realize is that you can use either of these pairs. I can use the 2, 8 as my xy because they both represent x and y, or I can use my -3 and a 4 because they also represent an xy. What you have to do though is you have to stay within a pair. So if I'm going to use the 2, I have to use the 8. I cannot use the 2 from this one and the 4 from that one because they're not a pair. So I'm going to go to my y equals mx plus b. I'm just going to use this first point. I'm going to put in y equals, my slope was 4/5, my x is 2, and then I have plus b. And now I'm at that point again where I have an equation I can solve. So I can multiply my 2 and my 4/5 out, and I get 8/5. I'm going to have to subtract 8/5 from both sides. And again, in order to subtract the fractions, I have to have a common denominator. And my common denominator would be 5, so I'm going to have 40/5 minus that 8/5. So I'm going to have 32/5 is equal to my b. Go back to write my equation. Y goes back to y. M is 4/5. X goes back to an x, and my b is 32/5. So here were 3 different looking problems, but we ended up having to do the same thing for all of them. I always had to find my m and my b. Sometimes it was given right to me and I didn't have to do any calculations. Sometimes part of it was given to me and then I had to calculate using other information I was given. And sometimes I had to calculate both of them. So for this last one I had to calculate my slope first, then pick one of them and plug it in for my x and y's. Okay, so here's 3 similar practice ones. I want you to pause the video and see if you can write the equations of each line for these 3 problems. On this first one here, I gave you a slope and I gave you the intercept, so you plug them right in for your m and for your b. And when you take 0 times x, that turns out to be 0. So all you're left with is y equals -6. Second one, I gave you the slope and then I gave you a point. So remember, this point represents an xy. So out of my slope formula, I plug in a value for my y, I plug in my value for m, and I plug in my value for x, which is what I did right here. And then I solve it out for b. And on this one, I got b to be equal to 0. So when I go back to write my equation, I would have y is equal to 3x plus 0. Well, since it's plus 0, we don't need to include it. So you just end up with y equals 3x. And number 3 here, this time you had to start by calculating your slope. So I did my change in y's over my change in x's and got -24/5. Then I chose to use the -2 and 18. You could have chosen the 3 and the -6 if you wanted to, and you would have still came up with the same thing. So I plugged in my 18 for my y, I plugged in my slope I found, and I plugged in my x, went through the calculations to find b, and I found b to be 42/5. Then I took that and I plugged it back into my slope formula, changed my x back to x, my y back to y, and got my equation down here. Y is equal to -24/5 x plus 42/5. So all of those still following a similar process. We have got to find our m and our b. Sometimes we find them different ways, but we always have to find them. Alright, here's another practice one. This time I want you to pause the video again and I want you to write the equation of a line that is parallel to the line y equals 3x plus 5 and goes through the point 2, -9. So think about what that problem means and think about how we always need to find our slope and our intercept. So go ahead and pause that video. When you're doing this one, you have to realize that parallel lines have the same slope. So by telling you the equation of a line that was parallel, I was indirectly telling you what the slope was. Had to pull the slope off of our line, the slope is 3. So what that's telling me is that the slope of the line I1 is also 3. So then I take my xy pair and I plug them in. I take the slope I want and I plug it in, and now I've got to solve it out for b, get b to be -15, plug it in, get my equation. A third one. This one, write the equation of the line that goes through the point 810 and is perpendicular to this line. So now you need to think about, what does perpendicular mean and how am I going to use that to get my y equals mx plus b. So go ahead, pause the video and see what you can come up with. This time you had to remember that perpendicular lines have the opposite reciprocals. Opposite meaning positive, negative, reciprocals meaning flipped fractions. So the line that we want to be perpendicular to has a slope of 4, which means our slope that we need is the opposite reciprocal. So we are only going to be using the slope of -1/4. We only use the 4 to find out what that slope is. Then I go back to my y equals mx plus b. I plug in my y value, I plug in my x value, plug in the slope that I need, -1/4. Solve it out for b, write my equation.